Happy Monday and welcome back. My co-host Wendy is a bit under the weather, so you've got just me this week, but we've got some great things we're going to be covering. I want to start by sharing a quote with you that's attributed to Eleanor Roosevelt. And she said, "You gain strength, courage, and confidence by every experience in which you really stop to look fear in the face. You're able to say to yourself, I have lived through this horror. I can take the next thing that comes along. You must do the thing you think you cannot do." That's a great quote, isn't it? When you've experienced narcissistic abuse over a period of time, certainly it changes you. But the thing is, whether those changes are empowering or disempowering is really in your control. Now, in episodes 68 to 72, we posed the question, are you as recovered as you need to be? And we looked at 5 negative ways of living that can still be present even years after you left that toxic relationship. And those 5 ways that are so negative, those ways of thinking and being, those are really symptoms that point to areas of your heart and mind that need some healing and that need a reset so you're free to be and do all that God has for you. So we took a look at those from the standpoint of recognizing symptoms in ourselves. And then the following week in episodes 73 to 77, we looked at the assumptions or the agreements that we've embraced within ourselves that show up then as those negative symptoms. We're starting with a symptom and we're working backwards, working deeper, getting to the roots of this, right? Now, this week, we're going to unpack things another layer deeper, and we're going to look at the fears driving those assumptions that have turned into noticeable symptoms. And we're going to do that so we can explore how to face leftover fears still lurking in your mind. Now, let's kick off this week by reviewing one of the symptoms, imposter syndrome. So imposter syndrome is something that's pretty well known these days. It has to do with ways of thinking and being that are fueled by the false assumption that says you have to work 10 times harder than anyone else to be okay, like we discussed last week. Now, there's also some variations on the theme, but basically it's the idea that you're working a lot harder so that you won't be exposed as an imposter, right? Like somehow you don't really have what it takes. And so you're just scrambling all the time to try to be good enough. All right. Well, this leads to the real issue that's underneath it, which is the fear that you think it might be true that I'm not enough, that you're not enough, that you don't have what it takes. Okay. So it all stems to that whole thing of I'm afraid that it might be true that I'm not enough. So let's take a look at where did that fear of I'm not enough come from? And it's very likely instilled by the narcissist, but it might be even more so that there was some of it at least prior to the narcissist, and the narcissist picked up on that and just amplified it. You may not have had a lot of that before. There could be, if you're with a narcissist over an extended period of time, then they can just drill that message into you until you start believing it, even if it wasn't there. Now, one of my favorite authors, you've heard me talk about him before, John Eldredge, he wrote a book called Captivating, which was written to women, and he co-authored that with his wife. And he introduced a concept in there that's sort of a universal thing that, we women in general struggle with. And that's that idea of being too much, like too needy, too messy, but yet not enough simultaneously. Too much and not enough simultaneously. I mean, talk about thinking that we can't win, that we just sort of set ourselves up, that we're always scrambling to try to be good enough because of that. And so what does it feel like if we allow that fear that we're not enough to be in control? Well, that's where we get that imposter syndrome, where no matter what we do, no matter how much we accomplish, it still feels like it's not enough. We feel like maybe it was a fluke that it happened. So we've got that fear that's in control. So we can never rest. We can never enjoy. We never feel like it's enough. So giving that fear power over us, that it might be true that I'm not enough, that maybe it's true that I'll be rejected and abandoned and humiliated if I'm not enough, right? That's like the logical outcome. So we think if we're not enough, and sometimes it's in the way we look, sometimes it's in the way we perform. And it could be any number of things that lead to us thinking that we're going to be rejected and abandoned and humiliated. So it truly is fear driven. But we're given a very interesting perspective on things, sort of the antidote to this, straight out of scripture in 1 John 4:18, when he says, there is no fear in love, but perfect love drives out fear, because fear has to do with punishment. The one who fears is not made perfect in love. Now, what does that really mean, made perfect in love? And without going into a whole theological thing, breaking this down and unpacking it, basically what we're looking at here is that if we're still in fear, we're not made perfect in love. What does love represent? It's being accepted for who we are. It gives us a sense of security. There's a peace that comes with that. There's an assurance that comes with it, that we know that we are loved. And our identity gets involved in that as well, right? So when we have that sense of security, that we're accepted, that we're pleasing in the Lord's eyes, when that gets really into our heart, then it drives out the fears that are performance-based or that have to do with who we are, right? It's taken care of. So we know that intellectually, the trick is getting that down into our heart. And sometimes we can't receive that because there's some healing that needs to transpire. Now, we're not going to get too much into the actual healing process this week, but that would be a good topic for another series that I can share with you, because, and I teach women this in my Cinderella No More program. I actually teach them a step-by-step heart healing process. So you're not just trying to manage this stuff, but you're actually free from it. You're healed, you're whole in that respect. So what we want to remember for right now is that the more we draw near to Jesus, the more we receive his love, the more we learn to value his opinion, that's going to progressively overshadow that fear that the enemy of our soul, our spiritual enemy, has implanted in us, or that the narcissist may be influenced by that spiritual enemy planted in us over time. And there's a lot of reasons why the narcissist did that. If you want to learn more about why, like really unpack it several layers deeper, that will give you some great insights, then you can go to my complimentary masterclass called Make It Make Sense. You'll find some information about that in the description for this episode. But I want you to remember something here, just to bring balance to this. Striving for excellence is a really good thing. It's a healthy thing to do, but driving yourself to perfection is the path to the dark side, right? Just like Yoda talked about in Star Wars, that it really does lead to the dark side. And it gives rise to all these fears. It's impossible to be perfect. Even if you think you can drive yourself hard enough to hit it, well, that perfection might last for a minute or two, and then it just reverts back to our normal, flawed human self. And that is not a bad thing. That's just a normal thing. We have our weaknesses and we have our strengths, and that's all part of the package that makes us who we are. But we do want to strive for excellence. We do want to strive for health. We do want to be on this path of continuing to get better and better and better all the time. That's a positive thing. We don't want to set ourselves up to fail by trying to be perfect enough that we're somehow going to overcome that imposter syndrome and all the nuances involved with that if we can just be good enough. And see, even good enough isn't good enough. If it boils right down to it, the good enough that we think that we're doing is really perfect, immaculate, just like the epitome of awesomeness, right? Well, moving toward excellence, we're still pretty awesome in that path, So I just want to give you a spot to think about and to consider, are you really living in the light of the Lord's love for you? If you aren't, what's getting in the way? That's the thing you need to ask yourself, because that may indicate that you've got some woundedness in your heart in specific areas that's giving rise to this. And whenever we have that unhealed stuff in there, that's where the fears come from, because we are not feeling that we're loved and accepted and pleasing to the Lord. And if we have His acceptance, then the acceptance of others, while it may be important to us, it dims in comparison. So just something to think about for today. Join us tomorrow. We're going to unpack the fear underlying the inaccurate assumption that I should have known better. And we talked about that last week, but now there's a fear that's driving that assumption, a fear that causes us to embrace and come into agreement with that assumption. All right. So I hope this was helpful to you. Know that we're with you on this journey. We're going to provide some guidance and some wisdom, and we're always going to challenge you to grow, okay? Because that just leads to some great things in your life. What God has for you is found in that journey of growth. Focus on becoming 1% better than you were yesterday, just 1%. Don't feel like you have to make this giant leap into being fantastic. Just 1% improvement, because all those 1% improvements are cumulative. And you are changing and growing along the way. As you change and grow, you're going to find yourself impacting other people in a positive way. You're going to find your business or what you do with your job is going to start taking off. You're going to be achieving goals that you had nearly given up on. But it's all as a result of those little 1% incremental improvements. So be sure to like, subscribe, and share this episode so it can help others too. And check out the show description, as I mentioned earlier, for some additional helpful resources. Love to talk with you. If you've got some questions, you've got something you want to share, you can email us at hello@AnnetteChesney.com. Keep going, because your best is yet to come. We'll see you tomorrow.